So, new record, a record called Rooted. As usual, we're looking at true stories. And to me, one of the most fascinating stories is the song Ken Small. In 2014, on April the 11th to be exact, I was down in the South Hams of Devon at a place called Slapton Sands. And I knew that had a very dark history down there. I knew something had happened in the Second World War during the training for the D-Day landings. A lot of American soldiers had been billeted there around, and that whole area had been evacuated so the Americans could practice for the D-Day landings. And they practiced for months and months. And on the night of April the 27th in 1944, they did a thing called Operation Tiger, where they sailed a bunch of landing craft out of Lyme Bay over to the west in a big long line into Start Bay, which is where Slapton is, and it went calamitously wrong. And that much I knew. Didn't have much detail. I just knew that it had gone wrong and there'd been an enormous loss of life. So I was walking along this beautiful beach at Slapton Sands, and there's a nature reserve called Slapton Lee behind the beach, big lagoon, and woodland, and the birds were singing and the sun was shining. But I was just thinking dark thoughts until all of a sudden, over my head, off the sea, the first swallow of spring flew over, and it stopped me in my tracks, and it stopped my way of thinking and turned it around completely. So I wrote a song called Dark, Swift and Bright Swallow. It's on the CD called Murmurs with Andy Cutting and Nancy Kerr. And I really liked that song, and I went back to that part of the world about 18 months later and sang the song, and the local people had heard about this song, and what I didn't know was that there was a family there who were very invested in the history of this incident. Dean and Sarah Small, Dean Small being the son of a man called Ken Small. They came to my gig, and with them there was a historian who wanted to talk about what had gone on, and with them they brought a mandolin, and the mandolin had a fantastic story to it. It had been given to a landlady from Torquay by a bunch of American soldiers who had been billeted with her. They'd gone off to war, they'd gone off to Omaha Beach at D-Day, and they'd all made it back, and when they got back they wrote on the side of this mandolin the landing craft number, and it said, "By the grace of God, we went to Omaha Beach, Normandy coast, June the 6th, 1944, and everybody's names written on this old instrument." And they'd given that to this lady, and the lady had ended up giving it to Ken Small, the name of the song, Ken Small. Ken was he was an ex-policeman. He was a real go-getter of a guy. He'd been a policeman. He'd been a very brave policeman. He'd been commended and all sorts, but he mistrusted the authority that he had to work for. He ended up moving to the South Hams and buying a guest house because he thought it was perfect. When he got down there, as you know, he had this wonderful life, but he had a massive nervous breakdown. And a friend of his, a fisherman, said, "You should go beachcombing." So he started to beachcomb, and one night there was a huge storm, and the storm tore off the beach, these big rollers like this, and the beach, instead of being like that, was like that at the end of the storm. And in the morning he went walking along the beach, and there was, evidence of a battle, basically. And he was fascinated. I mean, there were mines, there were shrapnel and shell cases, buttons, everything you could imagine that would be left over after a big Second World War mechanized incident. He wanted to know what had gone on there, and his fisherman friend said, well, there was this thing that happened in 1944, and out there in the water there's something, we don't know what it is, we've been snagging our nets on it for years. So Ken Small decided he would take it upon himself to find out what this thing was, and he got a diver to go down, and it was a Second World War amphibious Sherman tank, what's called a duplex drive tank. So they came off landing craft into the water with big shields up the side that kept the water out, and propellers on the back would push it along. Then it would get up the beach, they'd drop the sides off it, and you've got a land tank, you know. So he said to himself, right, I want to know what happened here. I want to find out what happened here. And he took it upon himself to salvage this tank. He got no help from the British government, ever. And the American government said, you can salvage it, but you have to buy it. So he bought it from the US government. Bear in mind, all the communication at this point was by letter or phone. So he's phoning the Pentagon, you know, he's writing to senators and congressmen. And eventually, after 10 years, he salvaged this tank. When they got it out, they put it on flotation devices, lifted it, and then chained it up to the beach, hauled it up to the beach top. And then he thought, well, how am I going to get it across the road, you know, to where I want to put it as a memorial? And the tank rolled on its own tracks, been on the seafloor for 40 years, but the tracks were still greased, and it just rolled across the road. Turns out that night in April the 27th of 1944, this big flotilla of landing craft coming out, an old English destroyer on the outside of the line, and a flotilla of German E-boats, motor torpedo boats out of Cherbourg, got inside of the line and attacked the Americans. The English and the Americans weren't even on the same radio frequency, so they couldn't talk to each other. The English sat there and went, oh, the Americans are using live ammunition again. And in a very short space of time, 1,000 Americans had been killed. And they hushed it all up because they couldn't let it be known at the time, for morale reasons, for the fact that it would give away what was going on. And so it was never formally announced. And nobody really knew what happened, but Ken Small found out what happened, salvaged this tank, turned it into a memorial to the dead. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to the 75th anniversary of that incident, which was in April of this year. And I went down and played the song Ken Small for Dean and Sarah. And I'm very glad that I did. It's a great story.
Ken never gave up. He scoured the tide lines, seeking small treasure down on the shore, until the night that the storm came and tore off the seafront, and he found his life's purpose in the litter of war. Shrapnels and shell cases, buttons and badges, revealed by the storm tide, long hidden and lost, like the lives of the young men who came to this country at such a great cost. Ken followed his dreams to this place in the South Hams. He came seeking solace down on the shore, but out of the blue the dreams become nightmare, awaken in darkness down on the shore. Out in the water, the fisherman told him there was something down there that just should not be, something that told him a forgotten story of young men dying in a burning sea, determined to salvage the truth from the seafloor. 10 years of struggle it turned out to be, until the Sherman tank rolled on its own 2 tracks without any help from the powers that be. Ken sits in his car by the tank at Torcross. His window is down and he's happy to share his sandwich with starlings, his story with strangers. He has nothing but time for those that care. He got a letter from the president, another from the witch, poor congratulations from the privileged and the rich. And he got the D-Day mandolin from the lady in Torquay who knew she had a gift to give, and where the gift should be. His money was gone and his marriage was broken. He sat on the seafront and he never grew old, but he found peace and treasure down on the shoreline. He found truth and healing and the story he told.